If you are in a transition in your life, whether it's a relationship, whether it's figuring out what your purpose is, if there is transitioning happening in your life, we are going to talk about what transitions are like, why we go through them, and why the road on the other side isn't as easy as sometimes we think that it is. But we're going to navigate all of this right after this. What is mindset? Our mindset is based on what we believe, and anything we believe in, we put into motion. I have spent my life putting the mindset of perseverance into motion, and now I am here today to share my journey along with others whose mindsets have changed the course of their lives. Hi, I'm mindset coach Lorraine Lindsey, and I believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. So are you ready? Welcome back to another episode of the Lorraine Lindsey podcast. We are all driven here in this show about mindset. I truly believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. And today I have a repeat guest coming in. She has been an expert, a coach on parent wounds and healing from parent wounds. We talked about this the last time that she was on our show, but we're transitioning, the two of us, in our own personal lives, even as it pertains to our coaching and other parts of our lives. And so we wanted to really have this conversation because I think a lot of people out there are going through certain transitions in their life. They're in a new season, and sometimes in that space you can feel a little lost. So we're going to be talking about that today very candidly, and hopefully there will be some value you can get out of this conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce my wonderful dear friend, Genell Gorman. Thank you so much for coming back to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, and I can't wait to go into this topic. I know
cannot wait.
It's needed.
Yeah. So last night you and I had an amazing dinner, and we were chit-chatting, and we're like, obviously had to come back on the show, right? And we're like, what are we going to talk about? Let's really be intentional about the conversation. And ironically, you and I were both discussing our personal journeys, what we've been going through as coaches for the time frame that we've been coaching, how we got into the space and the type of coaching we're doing, and how that may or may not be serving us any longer and transitioning into other things. And in that conversation, you and I were, of course, very candid with each other about how it really feels sometimes to just transition into another side. And it even though sometimes it can seem exciting, sometimes it seems, or most of the time it seems very scary, but nonetheless, it's inevitable if you're growing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think there's a big piece of also shame can happen when you're in this shift, because your old identity is like burning and this new identity is trying to be rebirthed. So a lot of times we don't want to talk about that in-between phase, and we instead just want to be like, this is the new version of me. But at the same time, there can be shame that like starts to surface when we don't know that next step right away.
Right. And then too, like when we were talking, and it's like when you transition, that also means that you have to let go of things. And that can be difficult because you have such an identity construct with who you are. Like you and I have talked about our pathology, parent wounds, things that we've been through that were traumatic growing up, and being rooted in identity with that, and it showing up in our lives in different ways. And then learning and being driven to say, I don't want to do this. This can't be my narrative. I can't live my life like this. And us going on a personal journey to grow and heal from those things, and then being called to coach and help people with that same thing. But then also realizing, like, me coaching, at least for me personally, me coaching people on the things that I coached on 10 years ago served a purpose not only for me to want to help them, but it was also very helping and healing for me. Because as I taught, I learned, right? But at some point, the things that I was talking about, which was primarily toxic relationships and how to overcome them, I was coming out of toxic relationships myself. Present day, when I get calls from people who want to talk about those kind of things, it's almost triggering for me in a way where I'm just like, I can't have this conversation anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And realizing that, oh, maybe I need to transition into something else that serves me as well, because I didn't realize that for a long time I was picking pathways that were supporting a narrative of pain.
Yeah, it really keeps us stuck also, like you had said, in our trauma, and it doesn't really allow that evolution to transpire and take over. And I feel so often when it comes to whether it's a business or a toxic relationship or whatnot, we stay in those dynamics because they feel comfortable, but it takes a lot of needing to burn down in order for that new evolution to come in.
Right.
So I think it's just like constantly reminding ourselves that we're meant to change. We're not meant to stay in a box, and we're meant to shift. So like you had said, when it comes to coaching, and same with me, it's like you're the different person when you started that.
Right.
And you continue to evolve, you continue to grow and heal. And it's inevitable for you to be this new person. So it's like coming into the self-compassion and accepting who you are and who you're becoming.
Right. And being in that empty space, man.
So
because
hard.
It's like you can feel when transitions are happening in your life. At least, especially when you're being intentional, right? Like, or maybe not. Like a relationship is a perfect example for me. Oh. Is that better? I'll cut it out. I'll edit it out. All right. What was I saying? Sorry. Oh, thank you, Dom. Thank you. I appreciate that. This will be like the little blooper special. Okay. All right. Give it a little space so I can cut it right. Okay. I'm thinking about me transitioning right now. So I'll be very candid about some of my transitions recently. One has been career. For one part of my life, I was a corporate girl making, nice salary, doing the corporate thing, but it was structured and there was, rules and people I had to answer to and things like that. Even though it was a big job, it was still under some form of structure. And at some point I got burnt out. I was like, this is not for me anymore. It doesn't matter how much money they pay me to do this job. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm really, really burnt out. So the decision I made was to quit. And I knew that I needed to plan the way I was going to quit and set myself up so I could really full tilt focus on coaching and my real estate businesses, right? The thing is, when you take off in an airplane, right, to jump out of it, the first thing on the climb is, oh my God, I'm so nervous. I'm so anxious. Am I really going to have the nerve to jump out of this plane? Will the parachute work? Right? And so you anticipate all of that, which is what I did. Then I finally get to the altitude in which I say, now you can jump. And then I jump. And then within seconds, it's like, okay, the parachute works. This is great. And then eventually I land. The part that I didn't plan for was to realize that where I landed was not where I took off from. And now I'm in the middle of nowhere. The parachute serves me nothing at this point. And now I'm looking around thinking, okay, where do I go from here? And I think that's kind of what transition feels like for me. Like I knew for sure that there was a means to an end for something. I thought I had clarity on what I was going to transition into. But of course, what we think is a thing never usually works out that way. And on this new journey, in this new transition, I keep getting these little baby transitions. Because now I'm like, when I started doing the coaching full time and I was like getting all these clients and I'm like, this is not what I want to talk to people about. This is definitely not serving me. I started getting compassion fatigue. I started getting overwhelmed. I realized I was taking on too many people's energy and not knowing how to release it. And I had to go back and say, I don't feel like I gracefully transitioned. I feel like I hit a wall and I'm Humpty Dumpty trying to put myself back together again. Do you feel like you've kind of been through that at all?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going through it right now.
Yeah.
So I totally understand. And one thing you said previously that I really loved, and by the way, I love that analogy, is when it's needed for a transition to happen. And there's a difference between knowing and actually taking the action. And I often find, even with myself, through this transition that I finally have accepted with like shifting of my business, it takes a lot of courage. Because you may know you need to leave, whether it's leave that toxic relationship, leave that business that you're burnt out in. But it's a matter of taking that first step into the unknown, because the more you stay there and that space that you know no longer serves you, the more suffering you deal with. And the more your body is rejecting energetically that space that you're in. And I mean, I'm sure you can relate, like having been in a past toxic relationship, it's like your body knows, but that's all you know.
Yes.
So transitioning out, you're like, but I love this person, but that's the definition of love that they were giving to you that you correlated as love. You don't know what's on the other side.
Yes.
So, you know, when it goes back to that airplane analogy, it's that same thing of like taking that leap of like trusting in God, universe, whoever your higher power is, that the way that you had it planned, it may not be the plan that your higher power has for you. And it's a lot of humbling and a lot of faith and trust, and it's freaking scary.
It's freaking scary. Yes. So that's good. Let's segue into the relationship thing, because I think a lot of people can relate to that. And again, coming out of a toxic relationship, when you're in a trauma bond relationship where you get love bombed and you love on each other and everything's so intense and so amazing, and then the toxicity creeps in at some point, and then you go through the cycles. Like I had a perpetual habit of being on again, off again, the cat and mouse game with my relationship. And in the toxic relationship that I was in, there was a point where it's like I always knew, right?
Absolutely.
I always knew, like in true candor, I always knew that the relationship was toxic. I knew that the peaks and valleys, the highs and lows, the emotional draining that was going on, the poor communication, on and on and on. I knew from the inception that it was what it was. But at the time, there was this investment in potential, or what I thought was potential. And there was also this great desire for them to conform.
Change. You can change.
Right?
He'll change. Yeah.
You need to be what I want you to be for me.
Right.
And while I need you to be that, I'm not willing to work on myself. And that was where I was stuck. Like, if you change, I'll be good. That was my attitude. If you change, I'll be fine.
I'll be safe. Yeah.
And it wasn't true. But it's so hard, because it's like a drug when you're in those kind of relationships. It is so hard when you know it's not good, especially the longer you root yourself in it, to tell yourself you need to go and you need to invest in self and start loving yourself more. Because the only reason why you think this is love is because you lack love for yourself.
And your childhood. What did it look like for you? You know I had said on our previous episode is growing up, I correlated chaos to love. So even though we know those relationships aren't healthy for us, it's all we've known. It's the only frequency, the only energy that we're used to. So anything other than that, it's like, that's boring. Now I'm like, that's healthy. But back then, it's so hard to get out of it because of that trauma bond and that addiction, like you said, that feeling of choose me, pick me, I'll fight for you. And one thing you had said that I want to mention is we often think, oh, this person can change if only they changed. Can we just take a moment and acknowledge how hard it is to change ourselves?
Facts. Yep.
And look inward and ask yourself, why are you accepting that? And why are you staying in a situation that no longer is serving you, to the point of you needing to try and manipulate, whether that is an unpopular opinion, but manipulate or construct a certain way for someone to be molding the way that you want, versus choosing yourself and walking away from something that no longer is actually for you?
Man, it's a great conversation, because
And I've been there. I get it.
Yeah.
It's hard to leave.
That's the thing. And that's the thing. It's so hard to leave it. It's so hard because, like you said, when you're familiar with chaos, with trauma, with abandonment, when it's familiar energy for you and you're dealing with that, but you can predict it, it feels in a way that you can almost control it, because almost essentially you know the outcome, even if it's not great. Especially if the trauma bond makes you feel like they're never going to leave you, right? Or there's that anxious attachment, and they're super attached to you, and they're very needy, and you feel like they'll never leave you, and they'll fight for you, and they'll fight with you, kind of thing. It can give you this false sense of worth. And I can tell you, for me personally, there were times when I would be in healthy relationships where I'll give you a perfect example. I was in this relationship. I had got divorced, and I think I was about a year out of my divorce, and I finally was like, okay, I'll try to date. And I met this guy, and he was really, really nice. Okay. Like awkwardly nice. I was like, this is weird. I'm waiting for the ball to drop here. Something's very suspicious. Like I didn't trust it. Right. But he was very doting, very loyal, very committed, and very mature. Okay. And I remember I had a tissy fit. I was sabotaging. I was creating chaos, waiting for him to be aggressive towards me because that's what I was used to. So I almost like pushed the buttons to see if I could trigger him to do something to me to prove my theory to be right. Like all men are like this. And he did nothing. What he did was he sat down and he watched me in my hysteria. And I had put on the show, not even realizing that he had checked out from the show. And I kept the show going for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, I ran out of steam. And I look, and he's just sitting there. And I said, well, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm just waiting for you to finish. Like, you get to be ridiculous all by yourself. I was so used to people participating in that that he made me see myself. And I was so embarrassed. So I left, okay? I go home. I get a ring on my doorbell early in the morning, like 6 a.m., and it's him, and I'm fuming. Why are you at my house uninvited? What are you doing? And he says, shh, I just came to drop something off. Okay, it's a gift bag. And I'm like, oh, okay, he's good. Got me a gift bag. He walks off. I open up the gift bag. There are diapers. There's a baby bottle and a baby book. He has a card and he says, this was for the baby that I witnessed last night. Let me know when the adult is ready to talk.
Wow.
I was like, that's the sexiest thing. No one's ever put me in my place like that.
It's so different when you have someone that does not want to put up with that because they are healthy. And I've noticed, like, even on my own journey, having attracted toxicity in the past and now really intentionally dating, I have strict boundaries on what I will not and don't like what I will and will not tolerate. And that's what happens when you start healing. You start realizing, you know, the chaos, the yelling, that's such energy wasting. Like it drains you and you can't function on your work or being a parent. Like it affects all your other areas of life.
It really, really does. And so circling back to the whole transition thing, I think when we're growing, that's when transition becomes more powerful. If we don't have a fixed mindset, because I think people who have fixed mindsets rarely experience their transitions. They don't open themselves to it, right? And transitions are scary because there's uncertainty on the other side of it, right? But then there's also this part of it that is exciting. So when I quit my job, I was definitely uncertain, like, will the things that I want to do actually work out? Will these things really work? And how do I adapt myself to not, having rules, not having structure, not having a boss, being my own, showing up for self? How do I incorporate those things? Not realizing that transitioning into that was gonna feel like tug of war because there's part of me that wants to pour into that new side of it, and the other part that's saying, retreat, retreat, go back, go back.
Yeah, it's unsafe, even if it's safe.
Yeah.
Our bodies are so used to being comfortable and consistency.
Yeah.
And like you had said, it's accepting and just trusting in that unfolding versus trying to control. Because the more you control the transition, it's going to be a lot harder for you to step into that. And I often say, like, looking at your past parts and of the times that you didn't know or why this relationship ended or why the situation happened that way. And then you can look back and see, like, it was all in a divine order.
Right.
So that's also a great way when you're going through transition. It's like reflecting back to the times that you were in the unknown and how you were able to get through that and where are you now?
And I think that's a good point. I think that when we are in transition, it's a matter of, like, in that moment, really being able to reflect, to see how resilient you actually are. Because I think sometimes, and especially when the transitions aren't things that we're choosing, right? Like, let's say an empty nester, like when I remember with my son for my whole life was my compelling why. He was my driving force for everything that I did. I was very motivated by him and his care and what I wanted for him. And so I was unstoppable. But when he went off to college, and then when he got out of college and left and moved to an entirely different state, across the country, that was a transition that was natural transition, but not really overly being emotionally prepared for that. Because number one, I was dealing with feeling like he doesn't need me anymore, and then who am I and what is going to compel me to move? Because I didn't know how to be unstoppable without him being the motivator. And so really trying to figure out, who am I in this space now? Who do I get to be in this space now? And what could I make me a compelling why for self? I didn't know how to do that. I didn't love myself the way I loved him. So I didn't know how to move in that direction. So for a moment, I became very stagnant,
Yeah, you saying I didn't love myself until I loved him. It comes back to doing the inner work. And like we had talked about yesterday in dinner, you're more than just the external. You're more than just a mother. You're more than just a boss. You're more than just an employee. It's who are you internally? And I know you had really highlighted that. So I think we should definitely talk about that. But it's like you're more than what you've attached. And that's something that I've done and I'm really dismantling is I'm more than just someone who's had a few businesses. Like it's my heart, it's my soul, it's my beauty that's within me that makes me me.
Right.
And I feel like when we're in this transition, it almost feels like our identity is shifting because we attached it to our self-worth externally.
Right.
Like even in the work that we do, even if we're acts of service and we help others in their journeys, it's having a lot of discernment to not allow that to be our why. So when things like this are shifting, we're not falling with that and crumbling with that.
Yes.
We're still that anchor that's holding on and still trusting like this is not going to shift or sway my worthiness of love or loving myself.
I think that what you just said was so beautifully articulated. And I think that's the key when it comes to transition. Because like you said, like we've talked about last night, even my experience is when I sit in front of a person and I talk to them, the first thing I want to know is, who are you? And most people don't know.
Who are you?
Right. Who am I? I am a compassionate person. I am a crusader for life. I am a source of love, right? That's who I am. But I've had to learn that because before my answer would be, well, I'm a mom or I do this for a living or I'm a coach. It was all of the things that I was doing and not the things that I was being, And so I had to learn to identify with self at my core, not the identity construct, not that my name is Lorraine or that I do these things or that this is what I think my purpose is. It's like on the inside of me, the feeling and the sensation I have that doesn't come with words. It's just an expression. Who is that? And how can I be that version, or how can I express that more and more in my life? And where do I find places to be that? So that way, when the transitions happen, the external thing may go away, but the core of who I am remains the same. And so the transition can be easier, but you have to know who you are.
You do.
Yeah.
You absolutely do. Again, in my past, I thought I needed to be a business owner to be loved. And whenever I tell someone that, they're like, where's the correlation? I'm like, it's my trauma, okay? But it's like that correlation of I need to be this way to be loved versus I am worthy of love just for being me. And I've been in like a deep acceptance of that, but it's taken a while to do. And just trusting that, like you said, who you are internally is more than enough.
Right.
Like I always say, I'm whole and complete with or without my partner, with or without like my job, just for existing.
Yeah.
Just for being.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about like, in the transitions of like life and thinking about the times when there was so much struggle in it, and like relationship, like getting out of a bad relationship and being so roped into it, right? Because the identity construct at that time included that person. When you bond with somebody, then your friendships and the families and other people become part of that circuit, right? It becomes like you two are the nucleus, and then there's this world around you kind of thing. And even when that's dissolving or it needs to end, you're not just cutting off that person. You almost feel like you're cutting off a part of who you are, especially if it's gone on long enough. And I remember when I got out of a really toxic relationship, and the only reason why I got out of the relationship, not because I was courageous and strong, but just the pain became greater than the love. It was too painful for me to stick around that I was suffocating with air all around me and I still couldn't breathe. And I was like, I can't be here anymore, you know? And then walking out of that, having to transition and saying, well, who was she that she chose this for her life? Like, there was a point where I was so angry with him, so hurt by him, so betrayed by him, that I used that as leverage to get out of the relationship. I used that to get out, to force me out. But it's not sustainable for me to keep it. Mm-hmm. So in order for me to let it go, I had to let her go. Mm-hmm. I had to let go of the identity that she was that attracted that into her life. I had to let go of the woman that told the lies about what he was and she knew that he wasn't. Mm-hmm. And that was hard, because then when you let all that stuff go, you're left with a shell of yourself, and you can feel empty. You can feel lost.
Yeah, isolated, all of that, mm-hmm. because you're dismantling that version of you, like you had said. And when you had said, let that version of you go, it's so crucial to do. But again, it's like trusting in that leap of faith, that taking that step into the unknown, knowing that it may not feel good. And I think that's the biggest thing to highlight is sometimes when we know we have to do something, it doesn't mean it's going to feel so like heart opening and like, this is going to be amazing.
Right.
Sometimes it's really hard. And like when I got out of my toxic relationship, that was the hardest thing I ever had to do. And like blocking them on everything because they would continuously keep reaching out. And I know that was not serving me and it wasn't healthy. And I had to stay sober from that. So that was its own journey, right? And then this like self-isolation, like you had said, of why did I attract that? Like what part of me wanted that? And no longer allowing, like loving yourself enough to attract what it is that you desire. And I think one of the biggest things is to highlight that when you're healing and you start evolving and shifting and changing, your taste in partners change too.
Absolutely.
Where that wounding of that toxic relationship was like, oh, I was looking for mom or dad's love as a child that I didn't get. And I'm getting this attention from this partner, subconsciously realizing we're replaying it. But then once you start healing and you start loving yourself, you're completely different of like, I'm not even into this person anymore. Right. And I'm sure you can relate. Like I've had clients where they're in these relationships, they continue working on their wounds, and then they're like, I'm not even into my partner anymore.
That is such a fact. I literally will tell people, most people that come to me for coaching want external environments to change, whether it's people, whether it's work or whatever. And it's like Wayne Dwyer says it, right? If you change the way you look at things, things that you look at will change, right? And I'm probably not saying it verbatim, but that's along the lines of that. And it's true. When you decide, and I always tell clients, let's not focus on them or that or these circumstances. Let's first focus on you. Again, who are you? What do you want for your life? What are your needs and your desires? What are your core values? And are you currently in alignment with that? Because if we can correct that within you, if we can reframe the way your narratives are, if we can tap into what these limiting beliefs are that you have, when we start to shift and reframe and you start to change your lens, you will see your circumstances different. You will be attracted to different things. You know, Tony Robbins talks about you have to raise your standard. We spend a lot of time in our lives having expectation, which is external, meaning I need these people, I expect these people to be like this. But if I say this is my standard for self, these are my core values, this is what I'm going to align, these are the principles for my life, then anything that is against that or out of alignment with that, if I'm sticking to my principles of my life, they won't match. And I can tell you, even just reflecting and looking back at old relationships that I have, no matter how beautiful the picture is, not interested. The conversation, not interested in the conversation. What attracted me, the energy, it's just not there because I did the heavy lifting. And it doesn't serve me. I don't need the chaos. Like right now in my life is a perfect example. I had like this epiphany recently. I was traveling and I had this moment where I was very present and I felt this incredible amount of peace and I felt this sense of adventure in my spirit. And I was like, I don't remember the last time that I felt this, but it was so beautiful that I said, I need this to be contagious. I need this to catch on. I need to be sick with this feeling.
Yeah.
And I just want to pursue it because I'm listening to my life more. I'm listening to what's feeling good and what's not feeling good, and I'm being more obedient to that.
True to that.
And transition in order for you to really gracefully transition, you have to be obedient to what you're thinking and feeling. You have to hear it, and see it and sit with self.
And be true to what it is that you desire. And again, instead of trying to shapeshift or change the environment around you or try and control the environment around you, like you had said, it's honoring your truth, your soul's alignment of where your soul is guiding you. I'm a huge advocate of your body is always guiding you. You got to listen.
Yeah.
Out of head, more into your heart, and feel like what's in alignment. I always say, like, what's expanding you and what's constricting you. Going through when you're on a date with someone, when you're at a job, do you feel more constricted in that environment or do you feel more open? And that's going to really start guiding you throughout your life.
Yeah.
If you just start taking those intuitive or internal check-ins, and you'll start being able to listen to more of your intuition and start creating a relationship with your intuition.
Yeah. And also, too, trusting yourself and being honest with yourself. Because here's something that I also have seen quite a bit. Sometimes the things that we're thinking or the things that we're feeling are projections of things that are limiting beliefs. And so while we may think it's a guiding force, it's the choo-choo train of self-sabotage, right? And what I mean by that is, if I don't think that I'm enough and I haven't secured that abundance in me and haven't created self-worth and self-love, and there's a limiting belief that I'm not aware of that says I'm not enough, people who are showing me that I am enough, I might be repulsed by. I might reject it, right? And I could think that I'm feeling something intuitively against those people, but they're not confirming what I'm confirming for myself, and so I don't want them in my life. Whereas we could have a person that lies to us and is void fillers, and all of a sudden we feel so expanded by that and so alive by that, and it's a false narrative. It's not a real intuitive feeling. And so it's very important that we first really tap into ourselves and say, do I trust myself?
Yes.
Am I honest with myself? And I told you, like last night at dinner, my narrative for a long time was that I was broken. I felt like I was a broken person. Surely my life suggested that by the things that I had been through. Like, gosh, she's broken. And I believed that. But I thought I was doing a great thing by seeking out healing. And I was doing it in a way with that confirmation of being broken. So everything I listened to, everybody I talked to, whatever books I read, I was looking to turn the pages and find confirmation in brokenness. And I found myself feeling enlightened in one moment and then really dark and depressed later. The enlightenment was not coming because I had an epiphany. The enlightenment was coming like, see, they're right. I am broken. I was getting excited that somebody could relate to my pain. I was not healing. And until I stayed still and actually took a break from reading, watching, listening to anything, and really hearing it like that small voice inside of me saying, you're broken. You're broken. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm repeating this. I'm telling myself I'm broken. No wonder. I've got to change that story. I got to change the story. I've got to give myself a new narrative. I've got to be powerful and not powerless in my conversation to myself. And when I can do that consistently for a given period of time, then I can go back and read the books and listen to the things and watch the programs or whatever it was. And when I did that work, and it was hard, because if I'm broken and that is rewarding me, because I get sympathy from people, I get to talk about it in great lengths and get my tribe to relate to me because they're all broken too. I had to transition out of that, which was lonely, because now I'm going to speak healing to a person that wants to stay broke, and they don't want to hear what I have to say. And so it was a challenge for me. But then when I turned the pages and listened to the thing, all of a sudden there was new messages in the same book, new messages, because I had to change my narrative. And I know I'm rambling about this, but when we say listen to our heart, it's so important, but we have to know that we're being honest with it.
Having discernment. And I think sometimes we have this story of what it's supposed to look like due to others' influences versus what our heart is truly guiding us to. And I want to acknowledge that, you may be, someone may be on a date with someone and they say, oh, I want this. And that person's like, oh, I want this too. But maybe it's not really what they want. But they feel like they have their mom in their ear or that person in their ear. So they're like, this is what I should be doing. but it's like being true to you and what's in alignment with your truth. Another thing I love that you said is having that discernment and not allowing those wounds to also sabotage when something good is in there, right? You may attract an amazing partner, have a great job opportunity, and you may sabotage it yourself due to that feeling of unworthiness where others may see you as this amazing person, but until you see that within yourself. And one thing I also want to highlight is self-love is a journey. You're not always on. And I feel like sometimes people think like, I love myself and I'm done, or I love myself and everything's amazing. I want to remind you that self-love is a journey. It's a work in progress. Some days you may not feel that way, but you go back to like your tools and coming home to yourself, going inward and reminding yourself of who you are. You know, that's going to not allow you to take over that emotion or that sensation or that thought. So reminding yourself of like being that pillar, but also knowing that you will have those little voices, but it's like, am I going to make those the truth, or am I going to acknowledge that and start shifting that mindset?
Right. I love that because, you know, I'm thinking about intimacy in relationships and how invested we are into those things with other people. Well, when was the last time most of us were very intimate with ourselves? And what I mean by that is getting to really know self. Asking yourself questions and being honest with the answers. How much time do we invest in that? Because when you said that self-love is a journey, it absolutely is. And just like any relationship, it's not always going to feel good. But if it's worth it to you, you're gonna do the work with it to sustain it and to make it a beautiful thing overall. And so that's the thing. It's like, tap in. When I am going through a transition and I'm feeling some kind of way that's not positive, I'm feeling some space of darkness, or I'm feeling lost, that's an opportunity for you to get to know yourself.
Absolutely.
Who am I? Why am I feeling this way? What am I afraid of? What is it about this next chapter of my life that I'm really scared of? And let me be honest with myself about what I'm afraid of. Because the thing that you're afraid of, you know that there's a version of you that can talk her off her ledge, that can tell her she's going to be okay. Because the version of you that's afraid is a child. It's your inner child. The adult version of you knows that you're resilient and you've already survived so many things. And so when you get to know yourself, you get to know which version of yourself is showing up, you know? And a lot of times we walk through life so blind as to who we are because we're trying to keep up with what we've said that we were, you know? And now I need this person that I'm telling people that I am to fit into these things. And no wonder you feel lost. No wonder you don't know what to do with this next chapter or this next season for your life, you know? If I had more conversations with self and it was the summertime or the fall, let's say, self would then know, well, winter's coming. Make sure you have your jacket and your snow boots and you can weather this storm. Make sure you're ready to adapt to the climate. Don't worry, we're going to be okay. That season's only for so long. And guess what? Spring's right after that. And we'll know where to hang up the closet and store the clothes. You know, and I know that's a silly metaphor, but I think that when we can be true to ourselves and trust ourselves and love ourselves and embrace the journey, as you said, then we can almost anticipate and prepare ourselves for the times when it's not going to be great. Because there are going to be times when it's not going to be great.
Absolutely. And I want to highlight that grief is almost inevitable when you're in transition. I mean, I've been doing a lot of grieving and it's been a journey and a process, but I know I'm being true to myself. So allowing that grief to pass through me and just being with it and allowing it to move through my body. And the more I do that, I always believe like grief is that like final acceptance stage. And again, the stages of grief are all over the place, as you know.
Yeah.
But I feel like when you come to that level of acceptance and grieving, you're creating then that space for the newness to come in.
Oh, yes.
So like when you're grieving, you're also opening. And that's what I want to highlight is that transition is also has so much grief to it. It's not just this like a snap of the hands and then you're in this next phase.
That was so beautifully articulated. That's exactly what it is. I love that you said that actually. I think that is a great way to summarize transition. When you're transitioning, there is something that you're losing, right? Because you're going into something new. And I think the best way, what you said was so perfect, is to understand the stages of grief. anything you're going to lose, whether it's a loved one, whether it's your kids moving on with their life, whether it's the job that you lost, even if you're choosing to leave the job and start something new, there is a manner of letting something go, right? Because if I'm holding on to things in transition, there's my hands are full. Mm-hmm. So in order for me to grasp what is mine, what is new, I have to let go of the other stuff so my hands are open for it. And I think in that process, like what you're saying is, there are stages. There will be denial at a point, right? You'll start with denial. There will be moments of anger, whether it's showing up as self-pity, feeling sorry for yourself. I'm going to be alone. I can't believe this happened. Mm-hmm. I'm scared, whatever that may be. There is going to be a period of sadness. And then, like you said, it can be interchangeable. 1 minute I'm sad, next minute I'm angry and all that stuff. Exactly. So you go through those stages. But if you are aware and you're like, all right, I'm in a transition. I have to let go. That means there's a loss. There's going to be stages of this. So when I'm feeling this, what stage am I in? Okay, I'm in the denial stage. Okay, all right, I got that. I just got to get through that. And then eventually you get to acceptance. And when you do, it doesn't mean you forget or you let go, but you let what you've let go of be the strength, the stamina that you need to get into the new thing. Because whatever you're letting go of is building you up for the next thing in your life. And if you can trust that, everything that I've experienced that was painful for me, that I've overcome and I've been resilient in, has given me incredible strength. It's something that I can draw from. It's something I can reflect on and say, I'm never going back to that. And so it's a necessary evil, even in transition.
Yeah, and one other thing I'm hearing is transition is a rebirth. Mm-hmm. It's a rebirth of these different versions of you. And when you're on this journey, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've died like 15 times just this year of just like ego death. Mm-hmm. What have I been attaching to? What have I made my worth? And just constantly allowing that to move through me through detachment. And I think that's like the biggest thing is that law of detachment, which I'm always working on. Like, let's be real, we're humans. But I see that the principle about that law of detachment. Because once we attach, then there comes so much more of that pain that comes with it. I'd love to hear what you're like, detachment.
It's so funny because I was on a podcast yesterday and we were talking about this very thing, attachment and detachment. And I think there are certain things that we attach ourselves to that need to be attached for a period of time for a reason, for whatever reason. And then when we are detaching from it, we have to be very intentional and very clear as to why, and be careful that our detachment is not suppression. We have to deal with why we're choosing to detach from something, and giving and just circling back to the thing about the rebirth, giving ourselves grace in transition, because when you are giving birth to a new, it comes out an infant. You're not going to walk in a whole person in your new experience. And so like any infant, like any child, any baby, there needs to be a stage of nurturing as well, But yeah, I think that in that stage, then you just organically have to detach from old self, but keep it in a way, if that makes sense. Like detach from it in a way that you're letting the energy come out and released, but not detaching to the point where I'm just going to bury it and keep it inside of me, because you need the reminder. You need to attach yourself to the reminder of it, to the power of the reflection. It needs to show, you need to attach yourself to the resilience that is that you've come from, but you need to detach the emotional meaning you've given to it that's going to sabotage you.
Yeah.
Still
witnessing those past versions of you, but also coming to terms with why it was no longer serving you.
Yeah.
And like why the cycles needed to break and change to receive this next version of you that you're being asked to step into.
And like I said before, like I said to you last night, when I had to let go, when I was letting go of my toxic relationship, it was never him or the relationship itself. It was me. I had to let her go. But before I could let her go, I had to get to know her. I really had to have empathy for her, compassion for her, sympathy for her. I had to understand her in a way that I wasn't judging her, because I can be very critical of self. And I needed to know who she was when she was in a love space. I needed to know who she was when she was in a creative space. I needed to know who she was out of her fear. I really needed to be intimately aware of who she was before I let her go. because then I needed to know when she was going to try to creep back in. And if I didn't familiarize myself with her before I let her go, she would be able to welcome her way back in and I wouldn't even know she was there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where she comes back, right? Like I said, you can let her go. I can kill her and put her to bed and put her in a grave, but she has a ghost. And if that ghost comes to haunt me, I need to be like, okay, you're back, but I'm not scared of you. But we need to sit and have a conversation. You're going to have to go in the corner for a minute because you're not welcome here. You're not messing up my relationship, okay? Or whatever it may be. All right, so how do we conclude this? What do you want to leave the listeners with when it comes to transition? Whatever comes to mind for you.
Right. I think it's just reminding yourself that transition is a part of life. And if you're in a transition, it doesn't mean you're in the wrong spot. It's a matter of you being called into the next version of you that you're being asked to step into. And transition can be messy and it can be untangling so much. But the more true you are with your heart, just keep trusting that the forward steps that you're taking, you're going to get to that next space that you're being called upon, even when you can't see it. Trust me, like that's always transition, but it doesn't mean you need to turn around and keep walking. It's like, let that past burn, have connection with that past version of you that helped you survive, but keep moving forward and trusting.
And trusting. The seasons are coming regardless, right? It's like the earth. It has its seasons. And it has to transition into the season. And we have to allow ourselves to transition to the different seasons of our lives and not be afraid of it. Because change is inevitable. It'll come regardless. Transitions will come regardless, right? Because life changes, life evolves. Things are happening around us, to us, and all of those things. But I think if we get a grip of it for self, like I said, getting to know yourself and loving yourself through it, you'll be fine on the other side of it. And you'll be so much stronger.
Yeah.
And it'll prepare you for the next level. Because every transition is a level, in my opinion.
Right. And one thing I wanted to chime in is like, I never thought I would be here. And like, what's here? Here's like this exact moment. I never thought I would have this business. Like, I never thought that. But it needed for me what had to happen was those past versions of me to fall to the ground so I could invite this new space in. So I want to acknowledge that.
Yes.
We just don't know. Who would have thought?
That is so true. That is so true.
It started with like a DM. Like, who would have thought when we reached
we'd
out?
be sitting here. That's so true.
You know?
That is so true. Even for me, my transition was being an EMT, doing that work, going to nursing school, thinking that was my pathway. I was going to be this nurse practitioner, whatever. And it just crumbled. But that crumbling in that moment, everything, what I thought was my world leaving me, transitioned me into something so much greater. It gave me a new discovery of self. And I didn't understand that or acknowledge that it was a transition. But now when I reflect back, and that might be something for the audience too, is like, think about times in your life where there was paradigm shifts, where there were shifts. Look back and reflect and see the wins and the victories and the overcoming of things, because sometimes we forget that where we are today is far above where we were back in those days.
Absolutely.
The woman that was brokenhearted, years and years and years ago, she can talk to that person today, and it's like, there was a time when I couldn't even imagine my life without them.
You're like, thank God.
And now I'm like, oh, she's got the torch? Good for her.
Exactly.
How's life? Mine's great. How's yours? So yeah. Anyway, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you again for having me.
Love it. And I'm so excited about the stuff that we've got upcoming with the group, with our crew. We'll be talking about that stuff a little bit later, so stay tuned. But please, if you want more information from Miss Genell, you can follow. I'll put all her links and her things on the bottom of this page. And if you've been watching, please do not forget to hit the subscription button. Give us the thumbs up. Let us know things that you want us to talk about on this show, and I will address those conversations. So until next time, ciao.